Most people do not fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they are trying to use discipline to hold together a life that is already split in half. They want one thing, but they believe they should want something else. They feel pulled in one direction, but they keep forcing themselves in another. Then they call the exhaustion weakness, when in reality it is conflict. Discipline sounds noble because it makes suffering look productive, but a lot of the time it is just a way of dragging yourself through a life that never actually fit. The truth is uncomfortable. If every day requires a battle against yourself, you are not becoming stronger, you are becoming more divided. And when a person is divided long enough, they do not become disciplined. They become tired, ashamed, and eventually numb. That is why so many people burn out even while appearing highly functional. They wake up, override themselves, push through, perform, and repeat. From the outside, it looks impressive. From the inside, it feels like a quiet collapse. The mistake is thinking that all effort is the same. It is not. There is effort that comes from clarity, and there is effort that comes from self-coercion. One creates momentum, the other creates resentment. One gets stronger over time, the other becomes more expensive every time you use it. This is why discipline can be such a misleading word. People hear it and imagine consistency, excellence, grit, and success. But in many lives, discipline is just the socially acceptable name for internal warfare. It is the part of you that says, I do not want this, but I have to do it anyway, and then expects that endless self-denial to become a personality. That is not how human beings are built. Eventually, the mind pushes back. The real problem is that people confuse controlled behavior with sustainable behavior. Controlled behavior is when you force yourself to do something because you think you should. Sustainable behavior is when the thing you do is connected to something deeper than pressure. That difference matters more than most people realize. A person can be highly disciplined for a week, a month, even a year, and still be building a structure that will collapse the moment stress gets too high. Why? Because the system was never powered by genuine alignment. It was powered by punishment, fear, guilt, and comparison, and those fuels do not last. They can get you moving, but they cannot carry you very far. If the only reason you are working, studying, training, or improving is because you are terrified of feeling behind, then you are not creating a life. You are trying to outrun shame. That kind of motion can look like ambition, but it usually ends in exhaustion. What actually works is not discipline in the abstract. It is desire that has been clarified, cleaned up, and made honest. Most people do not ask themselves what they actually want. They ask what they should want. They ask what would impress other people. They ask what would make them respectable, safe, successful, or redeemable. Then they build a goal out of borrowed values and wonder why it feels so heavy. A goal that is not yours will always feel like a tax. A goal that is yours can still be difficult, but it will feel alive. That is the first shift. Not how do I force myself, but what am I actually trying to move toward? Because when someone is connected to a real desire, they do not need to be whipped into motion every day. They may still need structure, planning, and accountability, but they are no longer fighting the current. They are learning how to channel it, and that changes everything. This is why so many people get stuck in what looks like laziness, but is actually a mismatch. They are not lazy in the deep sense. They are misaligned. They are spending their energy on goals that do not belong to them, relationships that drain them, jobs that hollow them out, or identities that look good on paper and feel dead in real life. Then they try to solve that deadness with discipline. That is like trying to fix hunger by chewing harder. The issue is not chewing. The issue is that the food is wrong. If a person keeps requiring willpower to perform basic parts of their life, the answer is not always more willpower. Sometimes it is honesty. Sometimes it is the hard admission that the life they built around themselves is the source of the resistance. Once that is seen clearly, the next step becomes less about self-control and more about redesign. Change the environment, change the expectations, change the direction, change the shape of the problem instead of endlessly punishing the person inside it. This is where people usually get uncomfortable, because discipline gives them a way to feel morally superior. It lets them believe that suffering is proof of character. It lets them think that if someone else is struggling, they must not be trying hard enough. That story is seductive because it is simple, but it is also cruel. It ignores the fact that some goals are structurally aligned with a person and others are not. It ignores how much hidden friction lives in the wrong job, wrong relationship, wrong routine, wrong city, wrong pace, Wrong expectations. A person can be exceptionally hardworking and still fail repeatedly if they are using all their effort to compensate for a life that does not fit. In those cases, discipline becomes a poor substitute for self-understanding. It can keep someone trapped in a mountain they never wanted to climb, and the higher they go, the more impossible it feels to admit they took the wrong route. So they keep climbing. That is not strength. That is fear wearing a responsible face. The people who actually change their lives usually do something much less dramatic than be disciplined. They get honest about what drains them, what energizes them, what they are pretending to want, and what they actually keep returning to when no one is watching. They notice what feels sustainable and what feels performative. They stop confusing pain with progress. They stop assuming that every hard thing is meaningful and every comfortable thing is suspect. Then they make smaller, sharper decisions. They reduce friction. They build habits that support their real priorities. Instead of using habits as a moral performance, they create routines that make good behavior easier, not just possible. And most importantly, they stop asking themselves to become a different human being every morning just to earn the right to exist. That is what actually works, not the fantasy of endless grit, not the theater of productivity. Real change happens when a person is no longer split between what they do and what they believe. It happens when the mind stops resisting the body. It happens when the effort begins to feel like movement, not punishment. There is also something else people rarely admit. Discipline alone does not create excellence. It creates consistency, and consistency matters. But excellence requires more than repetition. It requires attachment. It requires a reason that still matters after the excitement fades. It requires a future you can still believe in when progress is slow and invisible. That is why people who are deeply connected to what they are doing can often outlast people who are merely trying to be disciplined. The first group is not always more talented. They are usually more internally organized. They are not asking themselves, how do I force another day? They are asking, how do I keep building something I actually care about? That question is very different. One question comes from pressure. The other comes from purpose. One eventually leads to burnout. The other can survive disappointment, delay, and boredom. That is the kind of force that changes a life. Not domination over the self, but alignment with a direction that feels worth the cost. So no, discipline is not useless, but we give it far too much credit. It is not the source of transformation. It is often just the visible symptom of something deeper working properly underneath. What really changes people is not brutal self-control. It is clarity. It is desire. It is values that are actually lived instead of performed. It is a life arranged so that action no longer feels like self-betrayal. When that happens, discipline becomes lighter. It is no longer the main engine. It is just one part of a system that already wants to move. And that is the part most people miss. The goal is not to become a machine that never resists. The goal is to become a person whose life no longer demands constant self-violence to keep going. That is where real progress begins. That is what actually works.